I love me some Star Trek, but I also love me some superheroes. My very favorites have always been Batman and Superman, but I've also always been fascinated by Green Lantern. It's just such a cool idea, right? A hero with a ring that gives him a power limited only by the charge in the ring itself and their own imagination. Plus, unlike Batman and Superman, who have mostly been the same people for their entire histories, there have been a bunch of different characters to take the lead role in the various Green Lantern comics. Green Lantern doesn't refer to a unique individual, but a mantle that is passed from hero to hero, as well as an entire corps of heroes who are out there protecting the universe, whether they happen to be the star of their own book or not. My admiration for Green Lantern has mostly been from afar. While I've been a fairly dedicated fan of bats and soups for the majority of my life, I kind of check in and check out with GL. I briefly read the Green Lantern monthly comic in the mid-90s during the period when Ron Mars was writing and Darryl Banks was penciling, and they'd killed off Hal Jordan and Kyle Rayner became the star of the book for a while. That was a good jumping on point. I liked Kyle. I still feel like he's my Green Lantern, to the extent that I have one. The thing is, and I don't know, maybe this is part of what kept me from getting as intensely interested in Green Lantern as I was in Batman and Superman, I would always instinctively think about these characters and their stories from the point of view of a writer. And with Green Lantern, for a long time, I could never quite figure out what my take on it would be. You know how sometimes you fantasize about what you would do if you ever got to write for one of these characters? Not in a fanfic way, which anyone can do, and which can be a lot of fun, but for real. If the DC Comics fairy came through the window one night and said, "You are now the writer of a monthly comic book starring whichever character," what would you do? How would you write it? With Batman and Superman, I felt like I knew right away what I would do, at least in terms of concept and tone and general things like that. But with Green Lantern, for the longest time, I just couldn't find my way in. And it didn't matter since nobody was going to hire me to write for Green Lantern anyway, but just for myself, it was a puzzle that I wanted to solve, but couldn't. Then one day, it hit me. The idea came to me in perfect clarity, and I knew what it was. I knew what my never gonna happen Green Lantern book would be. It was such a simple concept, such an easy way in for me that I couldn't believe it took me as long as it did for me to think of it. That concept? Star Trek Cop Show. That's what my Green Lantern would be. Our hero, or perhaps heroes, visiting a different planet every month, or every few months, depending on how long it took to tell the story, solving problems, getting in adventures, investigating crimes, helping those in need, bringing law, order, and justice to the universe as only the Green Lantern or perhaps the Big Boss Man could. Green Lantern and Star Trek fit together quite nicely. They're both essentially pulp sci-fi series. They both center on heroes who mostly function independently but are officers in larger services. The heroes of both strive to uphold an honorable code, and like Green Lantern, Star Trek is a series with many protagonists. There's not one lead hero of Star Trek, there are many, and if you don't like one, chances are you'll like one of the others. Don't like Captain Kirk? Check out this Captain Picard guy and see what you think. Hal Jordan not your guy? Give Guy Gardner a try. Did you see him in the new Superman movie? Did you think he was kind of a dim-witted asshole? In the comics, he's even worse! By which I mean even better. Given how much the two series have in common and how compatible they seem to be, I was absolutely thrilled when, about 10 years ago, DC Comics and IDW, which controls the comics license for Star Trek, published the 6-issue crossover miniseries Star Trek Green Lantern: The Spectrum War. It's written by Mike Johnson with art by Angel Hernandez, and it brings together a team of Green Lanterns with Captain Kirk and the crew of the U.S. Enterprise, and to my utter delight, the entire thing is absolutely nuts. So here's the premise, basically. Ganthet, who is one of the Guardians, the blue guys who the Green Lanterns work for, takes a bunch of different colored power rings, I'll explain that in a minute, and uses them to rip a hole from the DC universe into the Star Trek universe, specifically the Kelvin timeline, which was the setting of IDW's main ongoing Star Trek comic at the time. And those power rings plus all surviving lanterns, I'll explain that in a minute too, plus Ganthet, who is now an extremely dead skeleton as a result of the effort necessary to do all of this, all of those things get pulled from the DC universe into the Star Trek universe. Once they arrive, the power rings Ganthet brought along that don't already have owners go flying off to find people worthy to wield them. 3 of them go to crew members aboard the Enterprise: Chekhov, Uhura, and McCoy. 3 more zoom out across the galaxy and land on the fingers of the Klingon General Chang, who for some reason feels moved to scream the Spanish word for daughter when it happens, the Romulan Praetor Decius, and the son of the leader of the Gorn hegemony, Glokon. Okay, the multicolored power rings. It turns out there aren't just green lanterns. There are also red, orange, yellow, blue, indigo, and violet lanterns. Green lantern rings are powered by will, blue by hope, indigo by compassion, violet by love. People with those rings are the good guys. Yellow rings, which have been around for a while, Sinestro, Green Lantern's archenemy, has a yellow ring. Yellow rings are powered by fear, orange by greed, red by rage. People with those rings are the bad guys. There are also white lanterns and black lanterns powered by life and death, respectively. Personally, I'm not a fan of the Roy G. Bivization of the lanterns. It takes something that was goofy but simple and turns it into something goofy but complicated and freighted with gratuitous lore. But it is what it is, and it works well enough in this story because, as I mentioned before, this story is utterly unhinged. Once the various power rings have been distributed, and the Enterprise crew has discovered Ganthet's rotting corpse on a rogue planet and beamed it into sickbay, Hal Jordan shows up like, "Hey, why do you have my friend's rotting corpse on your spaceship?" And Hal and Captain Kirk meet, and Hal figures out that this isn't his native universe, and that what must have happened is that Ganthet used what's called the Last Light Protocol to evacuate the various lanterns into this universe because they'd just been fighting this super powerful bad guy named Necron, who is the embodiment of death. And what he did was he killed every single living thing in the entire universe. I mean, as reasons to jump from one universe to another go, that's a pretty good one. Let me just repeat that for those of you for whom it didn't quite sink in. The setup for this crossover between the Star Trek and Green Lantern comics is that Necron kills off the entire DC universe, except for the handful of DC characters who escape through Ganthet's escape hatch to then participate in this crossover. Everybody else, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Arm Fall Off Boy, Brother Power the Geek, Stripesy, all your favorites, along with every single other person and or organism in the entire universe, is dead. Before the story even begins, they Krypton the entire DC universe for a Star Trek Green Lantern crossover. And it sticks. End of the DC universe. Permanent. No backsies. As justifications for comic book crossovers go, that one is, pun very much intended, overkill, isn't it? And I have to tell you, that accounts for at least 50% of my love for this series. I hate it when a creative team seems overly attached to established canon, when writers and artists seem more determined to serve the lore than the story they're telling. And what better way to signal to the audience that that won't be a problem this time than to start out with, we killed off the entire DC universe. Oh, you did? The entire DCU except for a few Green Lanterns, their allies, and some villains, you say? You have my attention. It takes about half of the series' 6 issues for all the pieces to fall into place. The pacing isn't ideal, I admit that, but then again, with a story this batshit, it doesn't matter as much as it probably should. On the roster for the heroes, we've got the crew of the Enterprise, which now includes Chekhov as a Blue Lantern, Uhura as a member of the Star Sapphire Corps, also known as a Violet Lantern, and Dr. McCoy as an Indigo Lantern. There's also Green Lantern Hal Jordan, Star Sapphire herself, Carol Ferris, and Blue Lantern Saint Walker, and eventually 3 more Green Lanterns, John Stewart, Guy Gardner, and Kilowog. Sadly, my boy Kyle didn't make it. On the villains' side, there are our newly recruited yellow, red, and orange lanterns, Chang, Glokon, and Decius, respectively, plus yellow ring bearer and archenemy of Green Lanterns everywhere, Sinestro, red ring bearer Atrocitus, and Orange Ring Bearer, Agent Orange. Oh, and Necron, the guy who just killed off the DC Universe, he's here too. And what he does is, you remember how in the Kelvin timeline, the planet Vulcan has been destroyed? Well, what Necron does is he restores the entire planet, brings back all the Vulcans who died there as zombies, and uses them as an army to attack the good guys. So there our heroes are, surrounded by Vulcan zombies and also Spock's mom, who is just the worst. Being undead really affects her disposition for the negative. Facing annihilation at the hands of Necron and knowing that if they fail to stop him here, Necron will go on to kill their entire universe just like he did the DCU. Sinestro shows up and joins their fight because he might be a villain, but he realizes that you can't go on being a villain if you and everyone else in the entire cosmos is dead. The other ring bearers, Chang, Glokon, Decius, Atrocitus, and Agent Orange, are somewhere else fighting amongst themselves. A Klingon, a Gorn, and a Romulan, each wanting their own empire to become the dominant one. Captain Kirk is like, hey, so how are we going to beat this Necron guy and his horde of Vulcan zombies and also Spock's mom? And Saint Walker, the Blue Lantern, says, well, one thing we could try is summoning the life entity. It's the only thing powerful enough to defeat Necron, the embodiment of death, but only an individual capable of wearing a ring of each color at once and harnessing the entire spectrum of emotion can summon the life entity. Kirk's like, entire emotional spectrum, eh? And he orders Bones to give his indigo ring to Spock, which Bones reluctantly does. No sooner does Spock put on the indigo ring than Chekhov and Uhura's blue and violet rings fly off of their hands and onto Spock's. Light years away, the yellow, red, and orange rings also fly off the hands of Chang, Glokon, and Decius, which is really bad for them because they happen to be in outer space at the time, and when they lose their rings, they turn into skeletons because that's what happens. Okay, you're out in space with a power ring, you lose your power ring, you go skeleton. It's science. The yellow, red, and orange rings find Spock. Then the Green Lanterns, Hal, John, Guy, and Kilowog, project the power of their rings onto Spock, and Spock becomes a white lantern, calling forth the life entity, which destroys Necron and reverses everything he's done in this universe, including the resurrection of Vulcan. Spock has to watch his home planet be destroyed again. But it's okay, Spock, you're better off this way. Trust me, you did not want your zombie mom sticking around on a more long-term basis. Sinestro, Atrocitus, and Agent Orange, the remaining bad guy lanterns, disappear, but the good guy lanterns decide to stick around, mostly because they have nowhere else to go because their entire universe is dead. Did I mention that? They're the only survivors of the entire DC universe? Anyway, Star Sapphire, Guy Gardner, and Kilowog go to check out the Kelvin timeline's version of Earth, and Saint Walker, John Stewart, and Hal Jordan join the crew of the Enterprise. Isn't that neat? And nuts? Neat in the most nuts way? Here's the best part. We're only halfway done, because there wasn't just one Star Trek Green Lantern crossover, there were two. A year after the Spectrum War, DC and IDW teamed up again with the same creative team, Mike Johnson and Angel Hernandez, to publish the sequel, Stranger Worlds. And if you thought the first one was wacky, just wait. Some time has passed as this second crossover begins. Hal Jordan and Star Sapphire are out exploring the galaxy aboard the Enterprise, and John Stewart, Kilowog, and Guy Gardner are residing on Earth. I guess John and Carol decided to switch places at some point. Might have had something to do with the fact that Star Sapphire is fucking Scotty now. I don't know. Anyway, we start out with Guy, Kilowog, and John giving a lecture at Starfleet Academy, which Guy uses to helpfully catch us up on the major events of the first crossover, in case some of us didn't read it or watch a YouTube video where an attractive, intelligent, charismatic, and modest Guy provided an extremely abbreviated but compelling and hilarious summary. After the lecture, we follow Guy, Kilowog, and John for a bit as they walk down the street, and it seems like they have all totally moved on from having their entire universe destroyed. And I thought Star Trek characters were emotionally resilient. God damn! Here's how Guy Gardner describes what happened during his talk to the Starfleet cadets. This scumbag called Necron destroyed the universe we came from. A brave little guy named Gant that managed to rescue a few of us lanterns and zapped us into your universe, etc., etc. My universe is dead, no big deal, and now here we are. This breezy, unbothered attitude about the total annihilation of life as they knew it is shared by John and Kilowog, and as we'll see, Hal and Carol and Walker as well. Guy seems ready to settle down and start dating. Kilowog is enjoying his custom-made replicated clothes. John notes how seldom they've had to use their power rings on this utopian version of Earth. Not only are they not experiencing any post-traumatic stress, it seems to be the exact opposite. Is there such a thing as post-traumatic euphoria? Because they've got it. I don't think I'd be doing so well in their shoes, though I'd like to think I'd still be able to look on the bright side. My family, my friends, my home, everyone I ever loved, every place that ever meant something to me, it's all gone forever. I'll never see it again. And instead, I'm forced to make a new life in this parallel reality that is different, yet just similar enough to the world I know to feel like it's mocking me, as though I have become an outcast relative to existence itself. And hey, look at that! In this universe, there's a juice bar where the Hall of Justice should be. Ain't that something? Things aren't all sunshine and lollipops and sexy Vulcan college professors. However, unfortunately, when they were pulled into this universe, the Lanterns weren't able to bring along their power batteries. That means the entire time they've been here in the Kelvin timeline, their rings have been losing power. And now they're so low on juice, they no longer reliably work. If they can't find a way to recharge them soon, they'll be forced to retire as Lanterns. It's not just the good guys who are noticing this problem. On the Klingon homeworld, Sinestro, by the way, since the end of the first crossover, Sinestro took over the Klingon Empire. He's the Emperor now. Sinestro is worried about his yellow ring losing power. But at the end of issue 1, there's a major development in the power battery problem. Kirk's crew and Sinestro's Klingons discover evidence on a remote planet that Oa, the homeworld of the Guardians and source of the power of the Lanterns, exists in this universe. Now the race is on to find it. The evidence they discover is a manhunter, a kind of robot built by the Guardians. There's a fight, and Sinestro ends up in possession of the manhunter. He takes it back to the Klingon homeworld, where he and Agent Orange, who is helping him out, manage to get the manhunter back in working order. Meanwhile, the Enterprise encounters a whole bunch of other, very much operational manhunters. Fortunately, Hal is able to talk them into being more friendly. Meanwhile, again, John, Guy, and Kilowog are asked by Starfleet to investigate a break-in at one of their most secure asteroid detention facilities. And when they arrive, they find that Atrocitus, who broke into the place searching for some extra rage to keep his Red Lantern ring working, has been killed, and his ring taken by none other than Khan Noonien Singh. Oh shit, Red Lantern Khan! After defeating John, Guy, and Kilowog, Khan sends out a distress call to lure Kirk in. While Kirk and Hal and the Enterprise crew confront the liberated, superpowered, and pissed-off Khan, Sinestro has used the remaining power of his yellow ring and the orange ring, which he borrowed from Agent Orange in exchange for making Agent Orange the Vice Emperor of the Klingons, to locate and reach this universe's version of the planet Oa. Red Lantern Khan kicks all the ass there is to kick until John, Guy, and Kilowog rally and use the last of their ring's powers to force Khan to retreat all the way back to the Klingon homeworld, where he finds Agent Orange has been left in charge and decides to just take over himself. Back on the Enterprise, Kirk and his crew, along with the Lanterns, are working on a plan to use the Manhunter's teleportation gateways to get the Enterprise to Oa, which is located at the center of the universe and would otherwise be a pretty long trip for the Enterprise. Oh, and speaking of Oa, Sinestro meets this universe's version of the Guardians, who haven't started the Green Lantern Corps yet, but have helpfully built the big power battery, which Sinestro uses to charge up his yellow ring, which, judging by this panel on the last page of issue 4, I'm gonna guess is a bad thing. The Enterprise travels to Oa, so does a fleet of Klingon ships led by Khan, who has taken over the Empire, though he promises to give it back to the Klingons once he's harnessed the power of Oa and used it to conquer the Federation. Sinestro has powered up all the way and is about to destroy the big power battery to prevent the other Lanterns from using it, but the Enterprise gets there in the nick of time. Sinestro kills a bunch of Guardians, but 3 of them, including this universe's version of Ganthet, escape and activate their prototype Green Lantern ring, which zips off to find someone worthy to wield it, which it does in the person of, you guessed it, Captain Kirk. Oh shit, Green Lantern Kirk versus Red Lantern Khan, the rematch of the century, the big show on the Big O, the brawl at the center of it all. No ring, except for the ones on their hands, no rules, and no holds barred. Also, Sinestro is there. Khan and Sinestro gang up on Kirk briefly, but then the other Green Lanterns charge up their power rings at the big battery, and they join the fight. In orbit above Oa, the Enterprise, commanded by Spock, is having some trouble fighting off the Klingons. Fortunately, right at that exact moment, Carol remembers that she doesn't need a power battery to charge up her Violet Lantern ring because it's powered by love. So she just smooches her boyfriend Scotty, and Star Sapphire is back. I bet Scotty's dead wife in the Prime universe couldn't do that. The combined forces of the Lanterns and the Enterprise defeat Sinestro and Khan, though Sinestro is able to escape to the antimatter universe before he can be captured. Hal explains to the confused Guardians who he and the other Lanterns are and where they come from, and Kirk promises that Starfleet will help the Guardians build a Green Lantern Corps for this universe, so they'll be ready if and when Sinestro ever comes back. Then, with all of that taken care of, the last couple of pages lay in some setups for a sequel that never happened, reminding us that St. Walker, who was captured by Sinestro early on, is still in Klingon custody, and having John, Guy, and Kilowog go off to rescue him, and also setting up a search for power batteries to recharge the rings of other colors, the ones that don't run on love, presumably. And speaking of rings, Kirk's still got one, and he ain't giving it back. You can just call him Captain James G.L. Kirk from now on. As the series ends, Kirk is all lanterned up, flying outside the Enterprise with Hal, preparing to warp off to a planet Hal discovered in the star charts. An interesting planet that Starfleet hasn't visited yet. A planet with a big red sun. The end. And before I get into why I love this completely bananas piece of work, can I just tell you how much I resent being repeatedly cock-teased with a Star Trek Superman crossover? Because it's happened at least twice that I know of, right there at the end of the Trek Green Lantern crossover, an interesting planet with a big red sun, that's obviously Krypton. And then a few years later, there was another DC IDW Star Trek crossover miniseries, Star Trek Legion of Superheroes, which has a splash page depicting the history of the Legion, including Superboy. Just fucking do a Star Trek Superman crossover. And make it as weird and dumb and careless toward canon as this Green Lantern one, please. Thank you. Brainiac takes control of the Borg, and instead of assimilating civilizations, they start shrinking cities and keeping them in bottles on a shelf like old-timey collectibles. Superman, who has traveled into the future to visit his descendants, teams up with Captain Pike and the crew of the Strange New Worlds version of the Enterprise to save the day there. That should get you started. Anyway, did you ever play with your toys when you were a kid and make up stories? I did that all the time. I'd have my He-Man action figures or my Batman action figures or my Star Trek action figures, those little 4.5-inch Playmates ones they came out with in the 90s when I was too old to be playing with action figures, but I still was anyway because what I do in my private time is my own goddamn business. And I'd make up my own story, my own episode. Sometimes I make an effort to imagine my episode to be something that would fit within the established parameters of the show. If I was playing with Star Trek TNG figures, I'd make up a story that, to my pre-adolescent brain at least, could have been the basis for an actual episode of the series. But sometimes I would throw that imposed plausibility out the window. I'd decide to have some real fun. So I'd take my Dr. Crusher figure and I'd grab my Dick Grayson Robin figure and act out a little play about Robin finding himself on the Starship Enterprise under circumstances which, even for the characters involved, were unusual. Sometimes I'd work in the fact that Spock's mom's last name was also Grayson. Sometimes I wouldn't. Don't need it. Throw it away. Sometimes there would be a big event to bring those characters from different centuries together. Sometimes it would be as casual as I could make it. Commander Riker leads an away team to the Guardian of Forever, and they step through into present-day Gotham City like, hey, what's going on over here? And sometimes I'd like the concept I came up with for, say, Batman characters and Star Trek characters appearing in the same story so much that I'd make that the series I was making up episodes for. So when I read the Star Trek Green Lantern crossover, and I see shit like Hal Jordan and Star Sapphire becoming unofficial members of the Enterprise crew, or Guy Gardner, Jon Stewart, and Kilowog being guest lecturers at Starfleet Academy, or Captain Kirk getting a power ring, I feel like I recognize what that is. This crossover's gleeful disregard for canon and continuity and the quote-unquote integrity of either fictional universe involved is also something I recognize and appreciate. There are a million different excuses Mike Johnson could have come up with for why Green Lanterns are interacting with Star Trek characters. The one he went with was the Green Lanterns slip out the back door as Necron is killing the entire DC universe. I respect that. And I respect that at no point does Johnson undo the destruction of the DCU, nor even explore the possibility. In an era when the tellers, and most especially the fans, of superhero and sci-fi stories are so religiously devoted to preserving and respecting every goofy little detail, that I'm going to permanently destroy the DC universe as the setup for my story level of irreverence is refreshingly audacious, even if only for a standalone crossover. Johnson not only never so much as teases bringing back the DCU after revealing that Necron wiped out its every life form, he also never inserts exposition explicitly establishing that the DCU destroyed in this story was an alternate version from the one we read about in regular monthly DC comics, nor that the Kelvin timeline we see in this story is not the same one in which the movies or the monthly Star Trek comic are set. It probably wouldn't make that big of a difference to me since my primary attachment is to how goofy and over the top the story is, but nevertheless, I do appreciate that this story doesn't undermine itself by telling us up front that it doesn't count. It's a dumb story, but it respects the intelligence of its audience enough to assume that most people who read it will get that since it's an intercompany crossover, the events of the series won't be acknowledged by works outside of it, without having to have that explained to them. And even those too oblivious to get it from this story alone will probably catch on once they pick up a Green Lantern comic published after this and they see that the DC universe is still just as populated with weirdos as it was before, or they read the next issue of the IDW monthly Star Trek title and notice that nobody seems to be talking about how the captain of the Enterprise is a power ring wielding superhero now. That's typically how crossovers like this work. Just because Superman and Spider-Man teamed up that one time, that doesn't mean they exist in the same world all the time. Or maybe they do. Whatever is true for this story I'm reading or watching right now is true for this story. And that's all I give a shit about. Everything is canon and nothing is canon. Is the Kelvin timeline version of Captain Kirk actually a Green Lantern now? Sure. Or not. What does actually even mean in this context? If the DC refugees in this story can get used to the entire population of their home universe being wiped out, I think you can get used to the idea that Captain Kirk is a Green Lantern and Sinestro is a former emperor of the Klingon Empire. And as I mentioned already, the DCU refugees can totally get used to the entire population of their home universe being wiped out. They all seem extremely fine with it. And I say good for them. Why would they want to dwell on the past? All their dead friends are there. Mike Johnson and Angel Hernandez, whose art is fantastic, by the way, and brings the Green Lantern characters into the world of Star Trek smoothly and makes them feel like they belong there right away. Johnson and Hernandez commit completely to this bonkers story they're telling. And the result is one of my favorite works of the IDW era of Star Trek comics. I've sometimes criticized other projects, particularly some recent Star Trek stuff, as feeling like the writers were treating the characters like action figures instead of characters in a story. But the Star Trek Green Lantern crossovers feel like the writer treating the characters like action figures in the best possible way. The result is a story unfettered by reverence for established canon or lore or a desire to pander to a fan base. A story that is colorful and weird and full of imagination. A story that feels like it was created by people who realize that if you're going to treat your characters like action figures, you can't just stand back and admire them like sacred relics. You need to take them down off the shelf and get your hands on them. Because toys aren't meant to be displayed. They're meant to be played with.